So welcome, Alex, Tatseng and Hugh, founders of RideTandem. Great to have you on the Blackfinch Ventures Fearless Founders Series.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Pleasure. So Alex, so RideTandem was one of the investments that we made through our EIS and our VCT actually back in March of last year, 2023. But Alex, as CEO of the company, can you start by telling us a bit about what you do and particularly how it helps the businesses that are your customers, but also their employees as well?
Of course. So we work with businesses that are not well served by traditional public transport. So that might be a warehouse that's built in the middle of nowhere because the land is cheap, or it might be a science park on an old aircraft hangar estate. And they are then struggling often to attract and retain staff because people physically can't get there unless they own their own car. And lots of lower income workers, historically, that's been a problem for them. And with the cost of living crisis, it's even now impacting white collar workers as well. And so that might be there's no bus at all, or it might be that it doesn't work for the shift times, or there's a bus from a little town nearby, but there's no bus from the bigger pool of labour that's in the bigger town just over there. And so we help create their own bespoke custom bus route that picks people up near to where they live and drops them off at exactly the right time for the start of their working day and home again at the end. And so we were completely flexible in being able to do this anywhere in the country because they're not our vehicles. So we work in partnership with local licensed minibus and coach operators in the main who do the bit that they're good at. So they drive the vehicles, they work out which driver's doing which journey, and then we provide technology, a management support layer, and 24/7 customer service to elevate what that local minibus company could do to a whole other level.
So it's a bit like sort of customized transport links for companies powered through, a sort of an Uber-like app in a way. We're very excited when we first found out about the company. But tell me, where did the original idea come from? How did you think to do this in the first place? What's the origin story for RideTandem?
So I met this group of dads who lived in a little town near Rochdale in the northwest, and I was talking to them about this amazing program they'd been through, and they now wanted to go and get a job as the next stage in their kind of personal development journey. And I said, well, what's holding you back? There's loads of jobs out there at the moment. And they said, well, there is a bunch of jobs 20 minutes drive that way, but I can't afford to drive. And they cut the bus route 3 years ago. And as somebody who at the time had been living in North London for 15 years, where if the Victoria line is more than a 2-minute wait, you're furious. You just can't believe what an outrage it is. To hear that there are parts of the country where people physically can't get to work at all because there's no job, was mind-blowing. And at the same time as learning about that problem and the whole concept of transport poverty, around which there's a huge amount of literature, and going to meet more and more communities. So it wasn't just this town near Rochdale. We spent lots of time in a town called Skelmersdale near Preston, and Colville and Leicestershire, and lots of other kind of not tiny towns. We're not talking about tiny villages here. They are good-sized towns, but they're not London. In London, there were lots of kind of 21st century transport tech concepts sprouting out. So there were things like Uber Pool, where people were sharing taxis. Citymapper, the routing app, had what they called their smart bus. So they were using data to work out where there were gaps in the public transport network and using shared taxis to be kind of smart buses in between. And so there was all this capital and energy going into building new models for London, which, as I've said, already has by far and away the best public transport in the country. So we set out to borrow some of those ideas behind what was happening in London and New York and San Francisco, but build a model that could thrive in Rochdale, Skelmersdale or Colville.
So it's a great mission, and I applaud you for tackling it. And I think it's always the way, isn't it? It's very easy to lose perspective when you're in London as to what's happening around the rest of the country. But Tatseng, I know you used to sit on sort of my side of the table. You were an investor in a social impact fund. What made you switch over and become part of RideTandem?
Yeah. I think for me, there had been a long line of sort of entrepreneurialism in my family. Both sets of my grandparents were successful sort of small business owners. One set owned a restaurant, one set owned a bakery, which is still actually the highest rated sort of bakery slash cafe in its local town on TripAdvisor, which my grandparents are super pleased about. And my dad sort of helped to set up Mercedes-Benz's subsidiary in Brunei. So actually that was the initial spark for transport, but also I think I grew up with lots of sort of entrepreneurial role models. And so although I spent a lot of my career in professional services, I always knew I wanted to make the leap to the founder side of the table. And actually, I think in many ways, having formerly been an investor has been helpful in many parts of the startup journey, such as fundraising and investor relations. But if I sort of one day exit RideTandem for hopefully a great sort of commercial outcome, if I ever decide that I do want to go back to the investor side of the table, actually, I think I'll be a much better investor as a result of having been an entrepreneur. I know that's something that Blackfinch sort of prides itself on, the fact that actually, unlike many other sort of European sort of VCs, quite a few of the Blackfinch team are sort of former operators themselves. And I think wearing that hat actually makes you a much better investor.
That's a great little plug for us. I didn't know
Reuben didn't ask me to say that, by the way. That was an independent voice.
But I think you're right, and it's quite clear with you, the entrepreneurship angle is sort of in the blood by the sounds of things. I know you're involved in, we all have titles in these businesses, don't we? And I think yours is COO, but you're involved in many areas of the business, for sure. And I remember talking about how the company had started up serving businesses that were mostly, or many of them were seasonal, so distribution centres that needed temporary workers at Christmas time, and you had that sort of peaks and troughs throughout the year. And I know you've worked quite hard to try and sell to target clients now that give you that security and you can help them all the way around the year. Can you tell us a bit more about how that demographic has shifted over the time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the first sort of full year or two of operations, so calendar year 2020 and then 2021, as you say, the bulk of the business came primarily from especially employment agencies who would have sort of seasonal contracts with end sort of customers, which was great in sort of getting our foot in the door. But of course, having to deal with that sort of volatility is not great from a revenue predictability perspective, also not great from an operational burden that it places on the team. So we worked quite hard to sort of diversify it, and in particular sort of actually start getting much more concrete sort of year-round sort of client relationships. And actually one of the nice things is that I think back in 2020, peak revenue or this more seasonal sort of revenue accounted for 40 to 50% of the business. When we look at the sort of stats for 2023, peak actually accounted for only about 10% of the company's sort of revenue. So it is a quite sort of nice diversification. And yeah, this makes it a lot more predictable when it comes to forecasting, as well as making it a lot more sustainable for the team, frankly, as well.
Yeah, and it's great for us as investors too. It's a little bit easier to sort of monitor the metrics of the company when it's a bit more stable. So well done for switching the mix in that way. So do you work with any household names that the viewers of this show might have heard of?
Yeah, and I think actually that's also an exciting sort of evolution in the journey as well, shifting away from employment agencies who do great work but often sort of behind the scenes to much more sort of high street sort of brands that people sort of recognize. We work with the likes of DPD and Royal Mail, so very much in that manufacturing and logistics sort of space. We also have quite a strong presence in food production. We work with Two Sisters Food Group, specifically with one of their subsidiaries that actually is the biggest supplier of chicken to Nando's, for example. And we're also starting to break into the retail space with one of our clients being the fashion retail brand Next. And actually Next was also one of our first white collar sort of clients as well. So I think that's an exciting sort of piece of the journey. As Alex noted, although our strength is in blue collar, we also think there's a lot of great white collar opportunities that we intend to pursue more aggressively in the next year or two.
Yeah, no, it sounds really positive. And Hugh, so as an investment team, we often talk about the mix of founders, and we look for founders that cover the key areas that we think are really important. That might be driving growth or closing deals, or someone to spearhead the technology, and that's the part that you're involved with. So you're the CTO of the company. Can you tell us a bit about the biggest challenges that you've faced trying to grow and launch and build this product and the tech over the last few years?
Yeah, sure. So as part of our sort of product offering, we've got a number of different components. We've got a rider app that our passengers use to buy their tickets. And we've got a driver app that the drivers use to complete the trips that they're working for us. And we've got a web application that's used by a number of different people. It's used by our customers. It's used by the transport operators we work with, and it's used by our operations team internally, so we can monitor all of our trips 24/7. I think one of the biggest challenges has been that driver app aspect of things, and it's been sort of quite an iterative process. It's really important for our business that the drivers use that app so that the riders know where the vehicles are, and so that we as operators know where the vehicles are and everything's running okay. But we work with lots of different transport operators, and those transport operators have lots of different drivers with varying degrees of experience with technology, with confidence with technology, with varying levels of phones, from some quite low-end phones with limited data, and also working in areas where 3G, 5G connections are quite bad and sort of drop out quite a lot. So we've had to work really hard to make that driver app really intuitive for the drivers, so it's very easy for them to sort of pick it up, having had not that much training with using it, but also make it really resilient, so that you're coming to areas of no service, that it will handle that and then sort of pick up when that service comes back. So that's been quite a challenge, and we've been iterating on that for a while, and there's still more changes to come. But I think
often the most difficult thing is often trying to make something look really elegant and simple, isn't it? Trying to make it very frictionless and make the experience really slick is often the hardest bit, which is a bit ironic when you think about it. But now there's three of you. You're often having to make decisions, talk through company strategies, directions, visions. How do you manage that dynamic, Hugh? I mean, do you ever argue? Who makes the final decision? How does it go?
Yeah, interesting question. So the company's we've been going for 5 years now. Yeah, kind of 5 years. And previous to us forming the company, we hadn't known each other for that long. Like we went through a process of getting to know each other quite quickly. And just on reflecting on that, like it is surprisingly how well this relationship does work with the three of us. I think we've all got quite defined roles, which helps. And I think there's quite good respect between us. So, if Alex makes a commercial call, we might ask questions of it, but we'll back his judgment on that. In terms of sort of arguments, I can't remember any sort of really. I can't remember any big rows that we've had. Definitely, the discussions that take longer are those around sort of the strategy and longer term sort of thinking around the business. They're the ones that we'll have, big long sessions with.
Prioritization is the biggest challenge, maybe, or one of the biggest, because there are so many ways which we could develop this business beyond the core. And I think staying focused on the right things when there are so many different exciting avenues that we could pursue is a challenge, but one that we work on pretty well together, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the dynamics that sort of helps is that we all met each other on a pre-teen, pre-idea incubator called Zinc. It's very similar to sort of the likes of Entrepreneur First, Antler, and the like. The head of the incubator, I think, described it as a cross between Love Island meets Dragon's Den in some ways. And one of the nice things is that in that program, especially early on, you're encouraged to work with a range of people. So each of us had worked with at least 6 or 7 other potential co-founders. And actually,
that's the Love Island bit, the kind of dating other people.
Yeah, exactly. But I think one of the nice sort of outcomes of that is that by the time the three of us had sort of come together, we had been confident. We had confidence from sort of trying to work with other people about the things we wanted and didn't want in sort of potential sort of co-founders. I think for the average sort of co-founding relationship, they're the only other co-founder or person that they're sort of trying to sort of match with. I think in our case, having more data points just gave us more confidence that actually this was the right sort of trio to go forward with.
I mean, you all certainly come across to us as being very transparent to us and also to each other. And I think that's helped a lot. But I'm still trying to get my head around this new program we're going to launch, which is the combination of Love Island and Trackers. It could be a big hit. I think maybe we should think about that as your next venture. But just coming back to you for a minute, Hugh. So we've talked a lot about when we invest in companies, we like to invest in companies that have good societal impact. I mean, we're not exclusively an impact investor, but we do look at the ESG sort of credentials of all the companies we invest in, and yours has got a very clear one. Can you talk a bit more about the societal impact of RideTandem, but in particular, and I know Alex touched on it earlier, so transport poverty, some of the people watching this might not really have heard of that term before. So what do we mean by transport poverty?
Yeah, sure. Alex touched on a little bit with when we spoke with that group of dads and their issues with being able to access jobs. But essentially, with transport poverty, our towns and cities have mostly been built with the assumption that people have access to transport. Mostly, people assume that you have access to a car, and that assumption just isn't correct for a big section of the population. So I think something like 1 in 4 households don't have a car, and for those people that don't have the cars, you assume that public transport will fill that gap. And in a lot of the areas of the country, that's just simply not the case. It's expensive. It can't be relied upon, and it has been getting worse. So if you're in that sort of group of people, your ability to access work is a problem, but also your ability to get to the hospital, potentially to get to school, or to get to even just social engagements is really affected. So that's transport poverty, and we're obviously working on that kind of access to work piece. But yeah, transport poverty has many different other aspects to it, and potential other areas that we could be moving into in the future.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have been doing a lot of sort of number crunching on recently is our sort of social and environmental KPIs as part of our sort of application for B Corp status, which we'll hopefully be able to secure in the coming months. But yeah, I think two of the sort of stats that we're sort of especially proud of are, one, as you sort of noted, our primary sort of use case is enablement of work, and we measure it in terms of wages enabled, i.e., all of the passengers we take and their sort of wages in a given sort of month. And I think the latest stat puts us at about more than £3 million of wages enabled per month, which is a great sort of figure. The other piece is the environmental sort of side of things. And there, I think the latest sort of stat is that we help to avoid the emissions of more than 750 metric tons of CO2 per month compared to the average commuter car. The average commuter car, I think, has about 1.14 passengers. The average right-handed vehicle carries more than 25 sort of people on board. So we're already sort of making a nice sort of dent there. And then, in the future, as client take-up of things like electric vehicles might potentially sort of increase as well, then, yeah, I think there, on both that and the sort of wages enabled, I think those are two big sort of channels through which we make positive impact.
Yeah, it's a really strong company in that respect. Alex, how do these values that we've just been talking about, how do they get reflected within your own company? How do you sort of manage your staff, and how does that run through?
I think it's a big part of how we hire. We're now 43 people, and obviously in the very early days, everybody is always going to be really aligned on the mission, because it's such a tiny team. Everyone's involved in everything when you have 4 or 5 people. But we've had a real focus on trying to maintain that for as long as possible. Everyone being here because not just because they want a job, but because they actually care about what we're doing and the difference that we're trying to make in the world. And maybe when we get to 200 people, we'll hire somebody who just needs a job to pay the bills, and obviously that's fine. But for as long as possible, we've definitely done it to date. We've built a team who genuinely care about both transport poverty and helping people access opportunity that they otherwise wouldn't be able to, and increasingly the impact on the environment as well.
And the beauty from our perspective is you really can have both. So you have this great positive impact on the world and the people around us and the environment, but also a really good growth rate and potential return for investors. Can you talk to us a little bit about the growth in sort of financial terms that you've seen over the last year or two?
Yeah, of course. So in the last year, we grew 75%, launched in a new sector in the white collar work that Tatseng mentioned. So we serve Next's head office in Leicestershire, for example. We set a science park in rural Oxfordshire, so a whole new segment for us, which is really exciting. And we've just hired our first colleague to look after that area as an area for growth. We launched in Germany, so our first international market. Very early days over there, but we launched our first pilot in, forgive the accent, Baden-Württemberg. Tatseng's the one who's been doing Duolingo German over the last couple of months. Number one in the world on Duolingo, apparently the other day. But yeah, that I think is another super exciting milestone. And that's a hugely exciting market for us, actually. Whilst when we were initially exploring which market to go to next, had questions about whether public transport overall would be better in Germany. And I think it is compared to the UK, but there are still huge, within the first 2 months of being there, we've had so many conversations with people who are having this issue. And most interestingly for me, are already putting solutions in place, but they are analog solutions without any data about how their services are being used, without any optimization of those services over time, and with all of the overhead borne by the company in managing that service. So for us, the fact that they've gone out and found their own analog solutions is a huge indicator that there's a real opportunity for our kind of digital managed services.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And exciting that you're moving away from the UK and into new territory so quickly. But Tatseng, it only seems fair, given that you've contributed so much of your life to learning a new language, to facilitate this movement.
Well, right now I'm able to do things like order in a restaurant. Maybe I'll one day get to the point of being able to negotiate a contract.
Tatseng's partner is also German, so that's
really
okay.
That makes it easy. Maybe you can expand a little bit on what the global expansion strategy is, if there is one. Where are you going next, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that I think over the next sort of at least 18 sort of months or so, the sole focus of international expansion will definitely be sort of Germany. I think I've chatted with lots of other sort of founder friends, and I know that often one of the big sort of stumbling blocks is if you try to go global too quickly. And if we were selling a pure sort of SaaS-based product, that's sort of a lot more sort of feasible. But given that our operations require a physical sort of presence with the vehicles and drivers, we want to make sure that we're sequencing the expansion in the right way. So I would say Germany for at least the next 18 to 24 months. I think the nice thing is that there are many different sort of clusters of geographical options that you could sort of subsequently pursue. One is definitely sort of other English-speaking countries, and North America in particular is a huge sort of market in that sort of sense. Also a lot more competitively sort of intense. The second sort of set, which I would probably lean towards a bit more if you asked me to pick today, is probably sort of further expansion into other European sort of countries. Certainly not only in Western Europe, such as France, but also if you think about parts of Eastern Europe, such as Poland, for example. There are definitely sort of big clusters of, whether in Germany with the Mittelstand, whether in sort of France, once you move past sort of Paris and its sort of suburbs, when you think about manufacturing facilities in Poland. And one, of course, the nice advantage of that is that if we can crack the model in Germany, clearly that will prove a sort of EU compliant sort of solution that could then be rolled out sort of subsequently. And which would actually also take advantage of the fact that quite a few of our existing sort of clients have a quite strong pan-European sort of presence as well.
Sounds like you've got a few more languages to learn.
Duolingo is going to be my most used app by the end of this year.
Sounds like it will be. So we've talked a bit about the past. We've talked a bit about what's coming up in the short, mid-term future. But Alex, if you cast your mind a bit further, do a bit of horizon scanning, where would you like to see RideTandem in 5-10 years' time?
We want to be the leading enabler of sustainable commuting across the world. The details of what that will look like in 8 to 10 years' time, I think, is still up for grabs. But that's where we're heading. And I think it starts with this mix of managed transport solutions with technology. And there are various different, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of prioritizing, there are various different avenues that we might go down after that to be, and we've deliberately kind of, as part of this kind of mission statement, chosen the word enabler. So it might be that we stay scaling these types of services. We might move on to more of a SaaS type model as we grow into new markets. But yeah, that's where we're headed.
Exciting times. Well, Alex, Tatseng, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on the Blackfinch Ventures Fearless Founders Series. We've genuinely enjoyed working with you over the time that we've been invested. It's been a lot of fun. It's been fascinating to see your growth, and obviously we look forward to continuing our support for you over the years to come towards hopefully a great result for everyone. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Ian.
Cheers, Reuben.
Thanks, Reuben.
Thanks.
Cheers.